Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at Germany's really ambitious, and I think you'd agree, very politically charged plan to modernize its military.
It's a huge undertaking. They're trying to expand it dramatically, and that means motivating a whole new generation that, well, that has a lot of resistance to the idea of mandatory service.
Right. And to really get a handle on the challenge, you have to picture this scene that our source material paints. It's a perfect illustration of the whole dilemma.
I know the one you mean, Carlotta.
Exactly. 16-year-old Carlotta. While most kids her age are, thinking about school, she's taken a train hundreds of kilometers to a military base in Bavaria.
In Grafenwöhr, yeah?
She's standing there in the cold, wearing a uniform, earplugs in, watching a massive Howitzer 2000 fire live rounds. This is at the Tank Artillery Battalion 375.
And this is all part of this new recruitment push they're calling Discovery Days. I mean, the Bundeswehr is really pulling out all the stops here. They're using serious resources just to give curious young people a very high-octane taste of military life.
And Carlotta is their perfect candidate. She's motivated. She's thinking about serving for maybe 3, 4, even 8 years.
She is the ideal volunteer, the exact person they're desperate to find.
But, and this is the core of the whole debate, she has this huge philosophical problem with it.
It's a massive sticking point. She loves the idea of serving her country, but she says, and this is a direct quote, she doesn't think much of conscription.
You shouldn't force anything on people.
Then you lose your motivation. That quote just perfectly sums up the entire political problem they're facing.
It really does. So that's our mission for this deep dive, to unpack this new Military Service Modernization Act, which goes into effect in January.
It's a real tightrope walk. They're trying to find thousands of motivated people like Carlotta, while at the same time they're building the back end, the infrastructure to compel service if they just don't get enough volunteers.
All without officially bringing back the compulsory service they suspended back in 2011.
And you just can't lose sight of the numbers here. It's staggering. Germany is trying to grow its army from just under 182,000 soldiers to 260,000 by 2035.
That's a huge jump.
It is. It means they need to recruit 80,000 new active soldiers, plus add 200,000 reservists. This is all because of their NATO commitments and, of course, the perceived threat from Russia. It is a monumental pivot.
It sounds less like modernization and more like an emergency rebuild. 12 years to add 80,000 troops. They need a serious pipeline of recruits starting now. So let's start with the carrot. What's the government offering to make this all seem irresistible?
Right. The government is absolutely banking on the money. The defense minister, Boris Pistorius, he's with the SPD, the center-left party, he made it very clear in Parliament. Military service will stay voluntary if everything goes as well as they hope. For his party, avoiding compulsion is a huge political deal.
So the centerpiece of that effort, starting early 2026, is this really, really compelling financial offer.
It's incredibly competitive for a young person just starting out. We're talking about a monthly wage of 2,600 euros.
Which is about 3,000 US dollars.
Yeah.
Before tax.
Exactly. For a minimum of 6 months of service. That completely changes the conversation from, patriotic duty to a very well-paid short-term job.
That's a serious investment.
Yeah.
If you're 18 and you compare that to an apprenticeship or some entry-level job, it's a real path to financial independence. Why make the 6-month options so attractive?
It just lowers the barrier to entry so much. The government gets that asking for 2 years up front is a non-starter for a lot of people.
Right.
So 6 months at a really high salary feels like a low-risk trial. They get trained people in the group fast, and the hope is that some of those people will then decide to stay on for a longer-term contract.
And the perks get better if you stay longer.
They do. If you commit to 12 months or more, the government will throw in a subsidy for your driving lessons.
Which seems like a small detail, but it's actually pretty clever.
It's very clever. Driving lessons in Germany are notoriously expensive, a real hurdle for young people. So by covering that cost, the Bundeswehr gives them something tangible that makes their life better, even if they leave the military after a year.
But this whole reliance on money, on financial incentives, is exactly where the political fight is. The opposition, the conservative CDU and CSU parties, they're not buying it.
Not at all. They argue that you can't just buy national defense readiness. They see it as an obligation, not a transaction.
The CDU and CSU would much rather just go back to full-on national service, to conscription.
Absolutely. They think it builds a stronger sense of civic duty, and more practically, it gives them a more reliable stream of personnel, one that isn't, tied to the ups and downs of the job market.
So you got the SPD trying to buy their way to a bigger army, and the opposition saying you have to mandate it. And this law, as a compromise, kind of leaves everyone unhappy.
It does, and that's the big question. If they don't hit their recruitment goals, the political pressure to just flip the switch on compulsion is going to be immense.
Which brings us to the stick. The part of the law that's really got critics worried.
The part that builds the infrastructure for that compulsion, no matter how much they talk about the voluntary side.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Because for all the talk about volunteers, this law creates some very clear, very mandatory obligations, for young men at least.
It starts pretty subtly in early 2026. Every single 18-year-old man will be legally required to fill out a detailed questionnaire. This is not optional.
And it asks what exactly?
It asks about their willingness to serve, their physical fitness level, their education, very specific stuff.
So the government is basically building a giant pre-sorted database of every eligible young man in the country.
Precisely. Before, they had to go out and find recruits. Now they're making every potential recruit identify themselves and their status. It makes finding draftees, if it comes to that, incredibly efficient.
And we have to be clear about the gender distinction here. It's a major point of contention.
A huge one. For women, this questionnaire is completely voluntary. The German Constitution, as it stands, only allows for mandatory military service for men.
Which has sparked this whole other debate. Should they change the Constitution? Or are they just using this to avoid a bigger political fight?
For now, they're sticking with the law as it is, which means all the compulsory parts of this new act only apply to men.
Okay, so that questionnaire is step one. What's the next and even more controversial step?
That would be the mandatory physical assessment. Starting in mid-2027, all men born in 2008 or later will have to show up for a fitness test and a medical exam.
Mid-2027. That date is specific. Why the 18-month delay between the questionnaire and the tests?
It's all about logistics. It's a massive hurdle. The Bundeswehr literally does not have the capacity right now.
You can't handle the numbers.
Exactly. To process potentially hundreds of thousands of young men, they need to open and staff dozens of new assessment centers. They need doctors, admin staff. The whole system has to be built. So the government is basically saying, we're passing the law now, but the machinery to actually enforce the mandatory part won't be ready for a year and a half.
That's a pretty stark admission of where their readiness is at. But once that machinery is running, the purpose of the tests is crystal clear. It's to figure out who is fit to be drafted if a conflict breaks out.
And that is precisely why critics are sounding the alarm. They see that compulsory medical exam as the return of conscription in everything but name. The process creates a pool of pre-approved, medically fit young men who are ready for immediate mobilization.
It takes all the administrative delay out of the equation in a crisis. They already know who's good to go.
Right. And that's why the government's promises about voluntary service feel a bit hollow to some. Critics are afraid that if recruitment numbers dip, the Bundestag can just vote to activate what they call needs-based conscription.
Meaning they just draft however many thousands of men they need from that pre-vetted list.
They just flick a switch. It's very efficient. And it's why old ideas, like a draft lottery, are still kind of floating around in the background. Even though the government rejected a lottery for now, this new system, the data collection, the testing, it makes any kind of selection method possible down the line.
The door to the draft, which was shut in 2011, is now officially unlocked and propped open.
You could say that.
So while the politicians are debating all this, what's the reaction from the people this actually affects? From the kids themselves?
They are making their feelings very, very clear. The day the law was passed, we saw this immediate backlash. School children just walked out of class and took to the streets in cities all over Germany. A school strike against conscription.
And this wasn't just a few people. It was an organized movement.
Oh, yeah. And it was deeply ideological. This wasn't just about, not wanting to miss a year of their life. The organizers were very specific. They said, we don't want to be locked up in barracks for half a year, trained in drill and obedience, and taught to kill.
Wow. Taught to kill. That is incredibly direct language. It speaks to a real generational divide on this.
It does. It also connects to this feeling of being ignored. One of the co-organizers, Leo Reinman, said, we feel neglected as a generation, and we don't see why our generation should jump into the trenches for the government.
That implies a kind of broken social contract. Like, why should we sacrifice for a system that we feel hasn't been looking out for us?
Exactly. And even with all these new mandatory steps, there's one key legal protection that's still in place.
The right to conscientious objection.
That's right. The state can't force you to bear arms if it violates your conscience. And the numbers show that this resistance is growing. The sources point to a major spike in conscientious objection applications. By the end of October, they'd already received over 3,000.
3,000? How does that compare to previous years?
It's a new record, the highest it's been since they suspended conscription in 2011. And what's really fascinating about this, it's not just 18-year-olds applying.
Who else is it?
It's a mix. It's coming from non-servers, but also from people who are already active soldiers and reservists.
Whoa. So people already in the military are now saying they have a moral objection to serving. That's hugely significant.
It is. It suggests this isn't just a recruitment problem. It might be a deeper institutional crisis. Even people inside the system are having an ethical struggle with this new direction.
So to keep the pressure on the government to make the voluntary system work, the law has some kind of accountability built in.
It does, yes. The Defense Ministry has to report to the Bundestag every 6 months on its progress toward that 80,000 recruit goal.
So if the numbers are bad, the politicians are going to hear about it right away.
And that's when the conversation about using the stick will get very loud very quickly.
This whole law just feels like a perfect snapshot of Germany grappling with its identity right now, trying to be a strong military power while holding on to a societal desire to avoid forcing its citizens into uniform.
It's an incredibly complex balancing act. They're dangling this lucrative contract for the Carlotas who are eager to serve,
Right.
while building the system to compel the Leo Reinemans who are out protesting on the streets.
So to sum this all up for you, our listeners, what you have here is a really delicate compromise. Germany is dangling a very big carrot, high pay, great perks to attract volunteers.
But at the same time, it's installing this stick, a mandatory assessment system for young men that collects their data, tests their fitness, and basically gets them ready for a draft if that voluntary plan doesn't meet Germany's NATO commitments.
So the final question for you to think about is this. If the German government actually pulls this off, if they hit their target of 80,000 new soldiers just by offering these great incentives, does that prove it? Does that prove that highly paid, short-term voluntary service is the modern answer to mandatory national service?
Or does the fact that conscientious objection is already at a record high, even before this all really starts, suggest something else? Does it suggest a deeper societal resistance to militarization that, in the end, no amount of money can actually overcome? It's really a test of whether a modern, prosperous country can still buy its own defense or if it has to demand it.